Good afternoon. This is Peter Coleman, the president of the Buffalo Niagara Manufacturing Alliance. I'd like to thank Alcott for hosting this webinar. I'd really like to recognize John Bradley as well for his contributions to the Western New York Manufacturers Task Force. Western New York Manufacturing has been up and running throughout the pandemic. Our recent survey results would indicate that over 90% of our members are operating. Our average operating capacity is about 70%. So we have been functioning throughout this process. There are a lot of questions out there, especially with regards to our employees and their health and safety and employee morale, and a number of questions regarding what do we need to do to keep them safe, their families safe, and our community safe as we continue to operate. We have, throughout this process, mitigated the spread of COVID-19 in our production facilities. We have had positive cases occur with employees, but we have not seen or have any evidence right now of community spread within our manufacturing production plants. So that's encouraging. I really look forward to the presentation today, and with that, I'm going to hand it off to our presenters. So thank you very much.
All right, good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jose Santiago. I'm the HR Compliance Manager as well as Corporate Counsel here at Alcott HR, and I am joined by my colleague Jennifer Aiello, HR Specialist.
Hi, good morning. I am a HR specialist at Alcott HR, as Jose introduced me, and I'm looking forward to interacting with you all this morning.
So just to give you guys a heads up of what to expect, so we have a presentation prepared for you. We've received a lot of questions from within industries like yours, and we figured that we try to answer as many of those questions as possible via the presentation. Obviously, you'll have an opportunity via the GoToWebinar platform to submit any questions you may have throughout the presentation. And after we get to the end of the slides, we're going to dedicate the last portion of the webinar to answering as many of the questions that you may have. Now, those of you that have registered and have provided an email address to us, you're also going to receive a copy of the presentation along with contact information for how you can get in contact with us if you have any follow-up questions or additional questions that we weren't able to answer within the parameters of the webinar. All right, so with that, I guess we'll get going. So I'll turn off my camera for now so we can focus on the presentation and not on me. So just give me 1 second. All right. All right, so obviously our presentation is regarding, embracing, can you go back a second just so I can read the title? Embracing the workplace changes of COVID-19. Obviously, this presentation is dated April 22nd. And as you guys, I'm sure, are aware, we've been getting a lot of information and updates fast and furious throughout the last several weeks and couple of months with everything related to COVID-19 and how we need to respond as employers and business owners with regards to all the changes. So obviously, any information that we're providing to you is current as of today, and just keep that in mind when reviewing whether it's the recording of this webinar or reviewing the materials after today's presentation. So we're going to discuss a few topics today. We're going to touch briefly on just a couple of reminders on some of the parameters for those of you that were fortunate enough to obtain funding through the PPP Loan program. We're just going to talk, highlight a few of the items that are required in order for you to maintain the forgiveness eligibility of the loan. We're then going to get into the topic of, bringing back employees. So now that you have this funding, now that things are quote unquote returning to somewhat of a normalcy, well, how do we go about bringing back our employees? And then the problem of what if the employee doesn't want to return? Like, how do I handle that? Then we're going to talk about adapting to the new normal. This has been a grand experiment. I've heard that phrase being used with regards to how employers have been responding to the pandemic and to how to adapt to new requirements that or or processes that, maybe we were at no time do we expect to have to implement, but, we've been forced to do so. And how are we going to implement some of those things into the, as we look into the future. So next. All right. So in case you forgot who we were, there's our information again. Again, just keep in mind that, although, we are presenting this webinar today and, and providing these best practice, the information is intended to provide, again, just general best practice, employment guidance. Alcott HR, nor I nor Jennifer, we're not providing legal advice. Alcott does not provide legal advice or tax advice. And the content of this presentation, again, it doesn't constitute provision of legal counsel or tax advice. So I just wanted to mention 3 things with regards to the PPP loan. For those of you, again, that were fortunate enough to obtain funding through the program, one of the questions that we've been getting is, okay, I need to, I need to bring people back. When do I have to bring them back? What if I don't have enough employees to bring back? So the forgiveness portion of the loan requires several items. 3 of the most important ones. Number 1, you need to make sure that the funds that you receive as part of the program, you need to spend at least 75% of those funds have to go towards the payroll expenses, payroll costs that you used in calculating your eligibility in the first place. No more than 25% can go towards other items as your rent or mortgage for your property or any debts that may have existed at the time that you submitted the application. Again, if you want to maintain the forgiveness eligibility of the loan, you need to spend at least 75% of those funds on payroll costs. If you spend more than that, or excuse me, if you spend less than that on payroll, you can affect the amount of your loan that can be forgiven. Now, another item that's important is the purpose of the intent behind this loan program was to allow employers to bring back their staff, bring back their employees. And in order to maintain the forgiveness portion, you need to bring back your full-time equivalents by June 30th of 2020. So what I mean by that is that we are expected to bring back, if you had hypothetically 100 employees during the look back period, whichever one you chose, let's say you had 100 employees, then by the end of June, in order to maintain that the forgiveness portion of the loan, you want to bring that number back to 100 as by the end of June. So it means you have to ramp up between now and then. It doesn't necessarily mean that by tomorrow you have to have the 100 employees back if that's not possible for you. But just keep that in mind. You need to have the full-time equivalent by then. And if you don't, according to the statute, according to the guidance, then the amount of your loan that could be forgiven will be reduced by the number that you failed to reach, let's say. So for example, if you had 100 full-time employees and you only have 90 by June 30th, then theoretically, according to the guidance, then you can lose 10% of forgiveness to your loans. And so you'd be required to pay back approximately 10% of that loan. Okay, the same idea goes with regards to wage reduction. Per the guidance and per the statute, the individuals that you bring back and the wages that you pay can't be any less than 75% of what you were paying them before the pandemic. So if you had someone that was making, 100 grand and now they're making 75, then that's within 25% of the wages that they were earning beforehand. And so you shouldn't have a concern there per the guidance. However, if that same person goes down to 65,000 from 100, then that's an extra 10% that you've gone up above beyond the 25%. So that person's wages were reduced by 35%. So that 10% differential, the 10% meaning the 35 minus the 25%, 10% of your loan, you can potentially lose the forgiveness eligibility, for that loan as well. And per the guidance, that is analyzed on a per employee basis. So it's not aggregately you need to keep the wages no more than 25% less than what it was, but on an employee by employee basis, you need to do your best to avoid any reductions of more than 25%. All right, now Jennifer will talk a little bit about bringing back employees.
So with those PPP loans going out, we've had a lot of questions from employers about, okay, so I did lay off some of my staff. How do I go about recalling them to the workforce? And you might be sitting here thinking, well, unfortunately, I didn't get approved for the PPP loan at this point, so why does this matter to me? Well, eventually, we're all going to be recalling back our employees, right? And, further good news for anyone who hasn't heard, the Senate actually approved a new measure to add 310 billion to replenish the PPP fund. That is going to the House today, so hopefully soon, if you haven't already received a PPP loan, you will have an opportunity to apply again. So when you're looking to recall your employees who you've laid off, what you should really look at are what type of work do you have available? You should look at all the roles for the individuals that have been laid off and ask yourself, is this role critical in order to, ramp up production? How does this role directly affect the organization's strategy? And does this role require any special skills or expertise? And that's really your first basis for deciding who to recall and when. Now, some employers have, laid off employees that have this similar job title. So from there, you need to funnel down and look more deeply into which individuals you're going to recall. You really want to have a supported, documented business reason for any decisions you're making in terms of recalling employees, because down the road you don't want someone to say, hey, you called back Bobby Sue instead of calling back Mary Jo, and the reason that you did that is discriminatory. You want to be able to go back to your files and have that written down, documented reason of, no, we called back Bobby Sue because we decided that we were going to go based off of seniority for recalling people with similar job functions. And when you select your criteria for calling back your employees, you want to be sure that you're being consistent. I'm sure anyone who speaks to an HR professional knows that that's our favorite word. You want to be very consistent in terms of your business decisions and recalling your employees. And you can choose whatever criteria makes sense to you. Some common ones that we're seeing are first out, first in. So anyone you laid off in your first wave, you might be recalling them first. You also might be making that decision purely based off of seniority. And another reason that we see for recalling is merit-based. And when you're doing merit-based, you want to make sure that that is based upon written documentation, not, your opinion on who is a better employee. It should be based off of, if you have performance reviews, you can base it off of that. You can also base it off of who maybe was on a progressive disciplinary action plan prior to being laid off and who wasn't. If you have measurable KPIs, you can do it based off of that as well. But just make sure, you're not saying, oh, well, for Bob, he's got seniority, so we're going to recall him. And then also Mary Jo is an amazing worker, so we're going to recall her. You need to be consistent across your entire workforce when you're picking your criteria. The other thing that's important when you're recalling your employees is making sure that you're offering their position back in writing. This might seem a little bit formal for some of you with your relationships with your employees. You might feel more comfortable calling them on the phone, and that's absolutely fine. But just make sure that you're following up with that written documentation. You're either going to want to send them an email with a read receipt and a delivery receipt, or you can send them a letter certified mail. So then you get that evidence back that they did in fact receive their offer of employment. The reason for this is, should the employee decide that they don't want to accept their position back for whatever reason, you then have this evidence that you can submit to the state, because it can impact their unemployment. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. The other reason you want to have that offer in writing is just in case you do have that situation down the road where someone says, hey, now wait a minute, why did you recall this person instead of me? It's a discriminatory case, and well, it turns out you did offer them their position back and they're just not remembering or taking advantage of a situation, you do have that supporting documentation that you did in fact offer their position back at a point in time and they chose not to accept it. A few other things that we've been getting a lot of questions about in terms of recalling employees is, can I bring them back at a reduced wages or hours? You absolutely can. So you can consider this almost as recalling employees. It's really new business parameters in these circumstances, right? So you can bring employees back based on the work you have available. So if you have someone who's a machine operator, but you don't have currently the workload for them to work 40 hours a week, you can offer them back their position at 20 hours a week with potentially the intention of ramping them up to the full 40 when the work becomes available. Now, when you bring employees back at a reduced workload, they could be eligible for partial unemployment because their position was a full-time position. So they can essentially continue whatever unemployment claim they're on and then start filing it as reduced hours due to COVID-19. In order to be eligible for partial unemployment, an employee must be working less than 4 days a week and be earning less than $505 per week. And that's gross earnings, not net earnings. Your other option that you have available is actually the New York State Shared Work Program. We've had quite a few employers become very interested in this program. That had kind of gotten a little dusty in recent years, but a lot of employers are taking advantage of it now. And essentially how it functions is if you have a group of employees, perhaps it's all of your machine operators, where you want to bring all of them back, but you're only going to bring them back at, let's say, 4 days a week instead of 5. You could be eligible for the shared work program in this situation. You would use this if you have a certain group of employees where they are being consistently reduced for their amount of work across their entire department. So, and that reduction can either be a 20 to 60% reduction and anything in between. The benefit of doing shared work versus having your employees file for partial unemployment is that there's no wage cap when it comes to the shared work. So they could be netting more than $505 per week and be earning some of their earnings back through this unemployment shared work benefit. One of the other things to keep in mind with shared work is that the benefit coverage must be maintained with an employee who's on shared work, and that's even if you're recalling an employee who used to be a full-time employee. You want to make sure that you're maintaining that benefit coverage for them, which can be, you know, depending on your financial situation, could be a potential burden at this time. So something to keep in mind with the shared work program. The other thing to note about these two different programs, if you're bringing back employees at reduced hours or wages, is that anyone who is eligible for shared work or unemployment is also eligible to receive that additional $600 in federal unemployment funding that we've all been hearing about. So that's another kind of incentive for the employees to return to work, because I know a lot of employers have been hearing that some of their employees might be making more on unemployment than they were in their normal position. But if they're working partial hours and gaining that partial unemployment in addition to the $600 of federal unemployment funding, they should be made more than whole at that point. Now, hopefully none of you are going to experience this headache like this young woman is experiencing if your employees are refusing to return to work. So if you're calling up an employee and, you know, recalling them to the workforce, of course you're sending them a letter later, like we talked about, right? But you really want to start with that conversation. If they're telling you, you know, I really don't feel comfortable coming back to work, start off with asking them what their concerns are about returning to the workplace. And usually they're going to have voiced some concerns about basically just some anxiety that they're having about COVID-19 from watching the news. I'm sure a lot of us are feeling that. And what you want to do is share with them the specific elements that you're implementing as a business in order to keep your employees safe. A lot of you are doing these things already. You have cleaning procedures that are a little more in depth than they were previously. I've seen a lot of companies have very strict visitor policies in place, maybe screenings that are happening before you're having employees enter the workplace or visitors, social distancing, and facial coverings. Now, the social distancing and facial coverings are required by New York State. I know we all saw that recent executive order that came into play last week about facial coverings for public-facing employees. What that really means in terms of when you should be providing these facial coverings is if you have any type of employee that's interacting with someone who's not normally in your workplace and they cannot maintain the 6 feet of social distancing, you should be providing them with a face covering. And we can talk about that a little bit more later as well. So your employees might have some interesting responses to that conversation, right? Some employees might say like, okay, you know, great, I'm excited, I'm bored of sitting on my couch watching Netflix, glad to get back to work. You might have some employees who self-identify as a high-risk individual who might have some comorbidities that would impact them more negatively if they were to catch COVID-19. If you have someone self-identify as a high-risk employee, you should notify them as the employer of some of the leaves that they may be eligible for. Those leaves would include the new federal leaves, like the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act would come into play there. If you're an employer who was previously eligible for FMLA, they might be FMLA eligible. And they also might be eligible for an ADA leave of absence. In these situations, you can ask for documentation from them. In fact, for the EPSLA leave, it is a requirement of the IRS that they provide documentation. For FMLA, they should provide documentation, and for ADA leave, they should as well. So in these situations, although the CDC has recommended that you do not require a doctor's note, for these specific cases, if they want to take a job protected leave, you can request documentation. And you do have an obligation as the employer to notify the employee of their eligibility for these leaves. Now, if you have an employee who, or laid off employee who does not qualify for a protective leave or does not apply for a protective leave and just says, you know what, I really don't feel comfortable coming back. I'll come back when all this blows over. We've absolutely been hearing that already. You can nicely notify the employee that unfortunately you do need to fill their position. You currently have work available, so you will be posting the position in order to fill it, but they're welcome to apply for any future openings that you have at the business. And you should also notify them that their refusal to return to available work may impact the status of their unemployment. Now, I emphasize that you should say may impact because we all know it's a little crazy right now with the unemployment system. So there is a likelihood that their unemployment claim will continue, but there is potential for it to be declined at this point. All right, I'm going to hand it back over to Jose to discuss adapting to the new normal in the workplace.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. So a lot of the questions that we've been getting is like, okay, so once this pandemic passes and we return to work, what is it going to look like moving forward? Is it just going to return? Is it just going to return back to the way things were before the pandemic? And unfortunately, that may not be the case. That may not be the case at all, especially at the beginning. So some of the things that obviously we want to consider as employers, as business owners, when receiving employees back into the workplace, when opening our doors and trying to get back to normal, is in regards to workplace exposure and making sure that we're providing a safe work environment for our employees, for our staff, and continue to do the things that presumably we've been doing this whole time. So, for example, disinfecting and cleaning. What steps have you taken or will take in order to routinely clean and disinfect areas, especially shared equipment and common areas such as conference rooms or kitchens? What are you doing to keep those areas clean? Do you have, for example, cleaning supplies readily available, hand sanitizer, Lysol towels, things of that nature that the employees can use immediately after using a conference room or using equipment in the kitchen, right? Those types of things. Because we're in a pandemic, the CDC does provide in their guidance that it is okay to test the temperature, to take the temperature of employees upon entering the workplace. And obviously that's something that you want to, if you're going to implement that kind of policy, you just want to make sure that you're consistent in how you're applying that, and that you have a policy in place already with regards to, if someone does have a temperature, that they need to return home to seek assistance from their healthcare provider, treatment from the healthcare provider before returning to work, to be cleared to return to work. Regularly monitoring employees, with regards to any symptoms in the workplace. A lot of these guidances that were in existence weeks ago are going to apply once they return. And we should all, our clients, we make sure that, when we work with them, that they have policies in their workplace with regards to infectious diseases in the workplace. That's something that hopefully should have been a policy even before COVID-19, but especially after this pandemic. You should make sure to review your handbook, review your policies, to make sure you have policies in place that inform your staff, inform your employees of what's expected of them if they become symptomatic or demonstrate any symptoms in the workplace that can be infectious. And also what your response as an employer may be, which may be that you may require them to go home if they're exhibiting any of those symptoms in the workplace. As Jennifer mentioned, if you're required to provide masks, then you want to make sure you comply. And even if you're not required to, if an employee prefers to wear a mask in the workplace, that's something that you should consider whether or not you want to accommodate that. It's probably best practice to allow the employee to do so if it doesn't interfere with their ability to do their job. And social distancing in the workplace. We'll talk about this a little more detailed later, but the expectations of social distancing are still going to be here once we're kind of, getting back to this new normal. So, for example, if you're used to having a meeting in your conference room with 15 people at a 15-person conference table, well, is that necessary? Is that something that at least in the interim, should you continue to have your meetings via Skype or some other online platform, even if the individuals are in the building, so as to help assist with the mandatory the 6 feet social distancing? Do you need to reconfigure your office space depending if you have people if it's an open floor plan and you have desks situated near each other? Do you need to reconsider the floor plan before you open the doors up and have your employees come back in? These are all things that you want to take a look at. How is your kitchen set up? Is it set up in a way, if there's seating areas, are they set up in a way that provide for social distancing? So this is an expectation that not just for your employees, but even for customers. We have some clients that are in the hospitality industry, and one of the things that they're thinking about is, well, our customers are going to expect some sort of social distancing. They may not want to sit elbow to elbow, at a restaurant anymore, regardless of how good the food is, because there's just an expectation. There's an awareness that's going to exist among our employees and our staff and among our customers and clients that we want to consider when we're, once we kind of go back to this new normal and kind of reopen our doors. All right. Some of the options that some of our clients have been considering, especially with regards to essential workers and those that are working in an environment where they may be more exposed than other employees to potential exposure to COVID-19. So some clients have provided for bonuses, almost like a hazard pay. I don't like to use that phrase per se because that does have a specific definition when we talk about hazard pay. But generally speaking, providing a bonus, an appreciation bonus to employees that are on the front lines, essential workers that are working in areas where they are, potentially can be exposed more so than some others. But if you want to provide any sort of bonus, what you want to make sure is that, it's best practice to communicate that these bonuses are discretionary they can be discontinued at any time. The primary reason for that, in a nutshell, is that if you're someone that is entitled to overtime pay, so you're a non-exempt employee, technically, if you receive bonuses that are not discretionary, for example, you create 20 widgets per shift and you earn an extra, $20 hypothetically. That is a non-discretionary bonus because you get it if you do a certain task or job. For example, night differential or something like that. If it's non-discretionary, then those monies have to be calculated into their quote unquote regular rate of pay. And if it goes into their regular rate of pay, it affects their overtime rate. So you want to make sure if you're going to implement any sort of bonus program, you want to make sure you speak to your HR professional or service provider to make sure that you're complying with best practices to avoid having to increase your payroll costs. You want to make sure that you're not discriminating against people that need to quarantine or use the federal leave. Okay, so if someone does have to go out on leave or they need to self-quarantine because that's what the guidance is from the CDC, you may want to consider whether or not you're not going to allow that person to receive the bonus, because it can have the unintended consequence of discouraging someone from self-quarantining, which is better for everyone. It's better for their health, for the health of our staff, our customers. If someone says, look, I'm not going to self-quarantine because I'm not trying to lose that $200 bonus that I get every month, that can have a lot of problems. That can result in a lot of problems. And so we don't want it to appear that you're discouraging employees from utilizing these federally protected or state protected leaves. Again, it's all about communication, especially with regards to the bonus that is discretionary. This is really about employee appreciation and, for them coming to work, potentially exposing themselves, or just because they have to leave their homes. A lot of people rather stay home right now during this pandemic, but, a lot of us that are essential workers need to come in and do the things that are necessary to keep this economy rolling forward. What you also want to do when communicating with your staff, with your employees, is and this is kind of also goes towards what Jennifer was talking about with regards to trying to convince them to come back. You want to talk about the benefits that you have available to your employees. For example, telemedicine. Although a lot of insurance carriers were kind of making their way towards this as an option, due to the pandemic, I think it's more prevalent now. More people appreciate the opportunity to see their doctor or their healthcare provider, via some sort of online platform, to obtain their prescriptions via mail and things of that nature, so as to decrease the exposure that they have, and just the convenience of it as well. One of the things that we talk about a lot with our clients, all the employees, all the worksite employees with our clients have access to our employee assistance program. And, not only is it a great program, a great service with regards to services such as, keeping your how to help you keep your finances in order. God forbid if you're dealing with the loss of a loved one, there's counseling available. Something as simple as just move to an area and need to find childcare. The EAP, the individuals at the EAP can assist you and do all the legwork for you in trying to find childcare while you're at work, and give you the list of people, the list of places where you can bring your child. So those are the kind of things that really can really make someone's life a lot easier, especially in a time like this. The program that we work with, they have a lot of COVID-19 related counseling and programs specific to the pandemic that a lot of the employees are dealing with, whether it's stress from the isolation, whether they've lost a loved one or know someone that's sick, or their finances are taking a hit because of people not being able to work or their incomes being significantly reduced. This is something that you can really reach out to your employees and really emphasize that, that there's something there, there's a program there that you're providing to assist them through these hard times. And highlight any other workplace benefits. I mean, something as simple as like, at Alcott, many of our clients have access to something called like the after marketplace. It's basically it's like a discount program. Picture it's like a Groupon, if you will, for a lot of services and products, and especially in these hard times when people need to really watch their spending. Something as simple as having opportunity to obtain, things that I normally have to buy, certain services or products, et cetera, to be able to receive a discount on it. Something like that might be very beneficial, to your employees or your staff as well. And so speaking of benefits, especially with regards to health benefits, some of the questions that we've been getting from our clients is, like, okay, so I'm bringing my employees back. They were, unfortunately, I had to terminate them 2 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago. Now that I'm bringing them back, what about their medical benefits? What about their health benefits? How do I get them back on? And so there are several things you want to keep in mind with regards to the health benefits. Obviously, this is very specific to your plan document, to your carrier. So with regards to any of these questions, you want to make sure you review your plan documents and you speak with your carrier to make sure that you're abiding by whatever the rules are with your particular contract or plan with them. But one of the things you want to consider is if you're bringing back employees but you plan on reducing their hours, for example, if that person needs benefits or you want them to be eligible for benefits, you want to think about what the minimum hours per week that are required in order for them to be eligible. Do they need to work at least 20 hours per week? Do they need to work at least 30 hours per week? So you want to know what that is before you start inviting back your employees, so that especially for those that need the benefits, you want to make sure that they're working enough hours in order to maintain their eligibility. Also, if any of these employees, if they went out on a COBRA or obtained health insurance through the state marketplace, we want to make sure that we cancel those benefits before they go on to your employer-sponsored benefits or health program. What date will benefits restart? Again, that's very plan specific. For some clients, the benefits will start at the first day of the previous month after the person is rehired. So if someone was hired today on April 21st, it could be that their benefits, even if they become eligible right away, because they were just terminated in the last 30 days, for example, if that's your plan's rules, then the benefits still wouldn't start till the first of the following month. That's a common situation, but again, that's very plan specific. So you want to inquire as to once your employees are eligible to obtain the benefit, when will those benefits restart? And also, if you traditionally have a waiting period, or if your plan documents have a waiting period that's required by the carrier, required by your plan, can that waiting period be waived for individuals that are being rehired during this pandemic? Now, some carriers require even upon rehire for someone to have to wait through the waiting period, it's so basically they would have to, whatever the waiting period was originally, they would have to do that again. They would have to meet that requirement again. However, maybe there's a rule about, if it's a rehire and they were hired within X amount of days, let's say 30 days, that they don't have to have that waiting period. But even if there is a waiting period that's mandatory, even for a rehire, you still want to reach out to your carrier. Now, not to say that every carrier will, bend the rules, if you will, based on the pandemic, but what we've noticed is that if you reach out to the carrier because of what's going on with this pandemic, a lot of them are pretty amenable to trying to work this out with you. But again, you have to make that call and be proactive. They're not going to call you, and generally speaking, they're not going to call you and tell you, what they're willing to waive. You need to be proactive. And worst case scenario, if you ask and they say no, you're in no worse position than you were had you not asked. So again, now you just keep these items in mind and refer to your plan document and reach out to your carrier. All right, and looking towards the future, We spoke about this briefly, but specifically, some of the items that, I spoke about at the beginning, that this was kind of like a massive social experiment for us as employers and business owners. Some companies for a long time felt that teleworking or remote work just wasn't something that would work with their industry or work with their business model. But because of the pandemic and because of the mandates that have been placed on us from our local, state, and federal governments, many of us have had to adapt and incorporate some sort of work from home program or telework and remote working using Zoom or Skype or some other platform. If that's something that you had to do, well, how did it work for you? Hopefully, you've been monitoring how successful or not successful it has been. How is this something that you can implement moving forward in order to, one, provide you hopefully with a platform to deal with emergencies like this, to deal with employees that need to take leave for any reason or stay home for any reason. Maybe you have a way of still maintaining that person's productivity, even though they're not able to come into the office or into the workplace. So it's something that you should take a look at to see if it's a policy you can implement moving forward, and what would that look like. Again, we spoke about it earlier, social distancing in the workplace. The expectation is still going to be there. People are still going to have this awareness of, not wanting to infect each other or become infected by any sort of infectious disease, whether it's, simple cold to the flu or something worse. So we really want to think about what is the dynamic in the workplace. Do you routinely have meetings? If you do these meetings have to be in person all the time? Can we do them remotely? Can we do them telephonic? Meeting with clients, obviously meeting in person is always best, but is that something where you can, meeting them, from a distance, meeting them online via phone, is that an option for certain tasks or responsibilities that you or your staff may have? If you have multiple people in an office, sharing an office, is that something you may have to look at? Can they social distance in the way that it's currently set up? If you use cubicles or workstations, are they set up in a way that they're at least 6 feet apart? Are they able to maintain that social distancing in the workplace? If not, are we providing masks or other items to assist them in avoiding exposure? Cleanliness and etiquette, we spoke about it earlier. It's certain tasks that we've taken on regarding cleaning down the conference room tables, doorknobs, equipment after we've used it. These are probably policies that we may want to continue even beyond the pandemic, in order to avoid the spread of any sort of infectious disease in the workplace. So a lot of these policies and things that we've implemented, how do we want to, should we implement some of these things moving forward? Also, I mentioned earlier that you should already have, whether it's in your handbook or some other policy, a sick policy with regards to, if someone is feeling ill, they should stay home. That's something that should have been in place before this pandemic, but if it wasn't, that's definitely something you want to review with your HR team or your HR service provider to make sure that your handbook is up to date, to include any policies that can assist in preventing the spread of any infectious disease in the workplace, and that it provides the employees with notice of what's expected of them, but also what you as the employer will do if necessary in order to protect them and your staff from exposure. Whether if you obviously have the right to ask someone to work from home or go home, leave the workplace if they're exhibiting certain symptoms. That's something that you should make sure that if you don't already have that in your handbook or current policy, that you should have that done, especially before you have people come back into the workplace. And something that I'm not going to get into too much detail about, it was kind of lost in the shuffle when New York State provided the COVID-related leaves that were effective immediately. Just remember that there's also There's also they also listed that as of later this year, starting September 30th, employees are going to become eligible to accrue a separate sick leave that they can start using probably by January 1st of 2021. But generally, it's the sick leave, the mandatory sick leave is going to apply to all employers, and whether or not you have to make that paid leave is going to depend on your size, and it's going to be anywhere from 40 unpaid hours to up to 56 paid hours of separate sick leave. So, that what that means in part is that, some clients may want to reconsider, some employers may want to reconsider how their paid time off policy is currently constructed. Whether they just want to continue it as the one general PTO bucket, if that's what they've had, versus having a separate bucket for vacation and sick, in part being because sick leave and documents related to sick leave, meaning how much sick leave was provided to a particular employee, how much sick time did they actually take in a given year. That information is going to have to be housed for at least 6 years, and it's going to be considered part of quote unquote payroll records, just like someone's wages and pay stubs, et cetera, that you've had to maintain in New York State for at least 6 years. Information related to sick leave, how much sick leave someone was granted, and how much did they actually use. That information is going to have to get housed and saved as payroll records, just like the other documents I mentioned. So just to keep that in mind, that's in September, but that's just right around the corner, and that's something that kind of it hasn't really been a talking point as of late, because obviously we've been all concerned with more pressing matters, but that was also included in the statute just a couple of months ago, about a month ago, that in March, when Governor Cuomo instituted the emergency paid sick leaves for COVID-related illness. All right. All right. So at this time, we're gonna, I guess, open it up to any questions that you guys may have that you have submitted. I know some questions were submitted to us prior to today's presentation, and some of you have submitted questions online, and so we'll try to answer as many of them as we can over the next 10-11 minutes. Jen, you want to take the first one?
I do. So we've received quite a few questions about face masks, probably because it's the latest and greatest. Those questions range from when should they wear it? Is it mandatory? Where do I get them? So I know we spoke a little bit about it, but essentially, if you ever have anyone in your building who is a non-employee, and that includes, it says member of the public in the executive order, but it also talks about customers and clients. So if you have, even in your shipping and receiving department, if you have someone from an external company coming in, delivering supplies, taking out supplies, your shipping and receiving department should be wearing masks. And it also says in the executive order that it's if they can't maintain 6 feet of distance. I would say best practice is, if they're coming into contact with someone externally, period, you should provide them with a face mask, because at the end of the day, you're not going to put, hula hoops on suspenders around your employees to make sure that they're not getting into close contact with others. You can't monitor this on a daily basis, and an employee could come back and say, well, they said I don't have to get within 6 feet, but really there's no way to avoid it. I have to, or I did because I asked them not to get close to me and they did anyway. There could be some liability there. So best practice would be err on the side of caution, just provide the face masks. Make sure that you're following proper cleaning procedures with those face masks as well. So if you can do disposable, that's great. If you're providing, something as simple as a bandana, that is explicitly stated as being what you can use as a cloth face covering in the executive order, then make sure that you are providing enough that the employees can have a rotation going. They can take them home and launder them. If you have like Cintas or something like that, a uniform laundering service that can launder them for you, even better. And in terms of acquiring them, something that's important, if you're having difficulty acquiring cloth facial coverings, which I'm sure a lot of people are, make sure that you're documenting all of your efforts to obtain those facial cloth coverings, because it does specifically state in the executive order that failure to obtain them does not recuse you from the requirement. So make sure that even if it's just, I checked Amazon today at this time, this time, and this time, I checked the Walmart website at this time, make sure you're keeping, you know, like an Excel spreadsheet where you're documenting your efforts to obtain. And then I also just wanted to draw everyone's attention to the fact that on the New York Department of Health website, there is a little FAQ about the face mask requirement, which is a great resource. And it does say on there that if you as an employer are unable to procure these face coverings, you can reach out to your local Office of Emergency Management to determine if there are extra supplies that exist and put a request in for the facial coverings. Now, will they have them? I don't know, they might not, but at least you can document that you put forth that effort as well, and we're trying to go above and beyond to obtain these facial coverings for your employees. I would expect that this executive order will be in place until at least May 15th, which is when, for now, pause has been extended to, but it may go beyond that, and I would expect that it will. So if you don't throw your hands up and give up yet, make sure that you're putting forth every effort to obtain those. All right, Jose, do you have a question?
Yeah, so one of the questions that we've gotten is whether an employee, if an employee is going out on leave, do we have to apply the federal or the New York State leave? So if I'm understanding the question, it's like, so which leave will apply to a particular situation? It's going to depend on the category. New York State is very specific as to when you can utilize the paid leave, including needing a copy of the specific quarantine order that applies to your situation. Also, within the statute, it specifically says that if the federal leave provides you with more benefit than the state leave, then you're not eligible for the state leave. You actually have to go through the federal paid leave programs, whether it's the emergency paid sick leave or the EFML-EA, the extension of the Family Medical Leave Act. Keep in mind that for those of you, I know we didn't talk too much about it, but the federal paid leaves do allow for the employer to receive payroll tax credits, to receive credit, basically get reimbursed for the wages that they're paying out towards the emergency paid sick leave or the EFML-EA. But keep in mind that per the guidance, it's the employer's responsibility to show that they did their due diligence to make sure that the particular employee was in fact eligible for that paid leave. And if you don't have the documentation, the supporting documentation to support the eligibility of that particular leave, then you as the employer could lose the opportunity to have those wages reimbursed or receive a credit for those wages. So, for example, if someone is out on leave and they say that the reason why they're out is because they're considered high risk, and they have documentation from their healthcare provider saying that they're recommended to quarantine or to, while they are, during this pandemic, then it would behoove the employer, in order to maintain the opportunity to receive those credits or to be reimbursed, to ask for documentation from the healthcare provider, and that way you have that in your records to substantiate your request for that credit or your request to have those wages reimbursed. All right.
Okay, so we also have a question about this is about the PPP loan. It's asking, how do you calculate FTEs for a workforce that is 70% part-time. So FTE traditionally means full-time equivalents. However, in all the documentation that's being released by the SBA, it seems like they're actually using it to mean full-time employees. And there is actually an FAQ on the Treasury website. If you can't tell, I really like FAQs direct from the source, and so should you. They're the best place to get information. Don't Google things and look at something posted by, Joe on a message board, because he might not know what he's talking about. FAQ is the best place to go. But the Treasury Department did post an FAQ about PPP, and it says specifically on the FAQ, in terms of number of staff, your loan forgiveness will be reduced if you decrease your full-time employee headcount. So when you're providing your headcount to your bank, it is in terms of your estimation period, your comparison period, you're looking at your full-time employee headcount. And when you're looking at your headcount for June 30th, according to this FAQ, it is also just your full-time employees. And that could be beneficial to you as an employer, particularly if you do have a primarily part-time staff. It's really only based off of your full-time headcount, so you're likely to continue meeting your thresholds in terms of your full-time headcount, as well as your 75% of payroll requirement. So you're really looking at that full-time status.
Yeah, another question that we received, and I think we answered to an extent during the presentation, is what can we do to make our employees feel safe? So again, I think a lot of that goes to several of the items that we discussed earlier. Everything from if you do have the opportunity and the resources to implement some sort of remote work program where maybe your staff can alternate who works from home and who works in the office or the facility, so that you can decrease exposure, potential exposure, and increase social distancing in the workplace. That's something to consider whether remote work works for you. Also, having cleaning supplies at the ready, easily available, visibly available, whether it's in kitchens, conference rooms, etc. Gloves where appropriate, masks. I think in something like this, the more of these things are available and visible, it really shows that the employer is doing everything they can to mitigate exposure. And also, I think also one of the things that many of our clients are doing that we feel is it's important, not necessarily spoken about in guidances, but I think constant communication with your team. Meeting with them, whether it's on a weekly, bi-weekly basis, whatever it is, whatever's appropriate for your business, to talk about the things that you've implemented. What have you done? What have you done to reduce, potential exposure? What are policies that you've implemented that maybe they're not aware of? What are things that you are considering or will be doing from this point forward to help reduce that risk? I think that a lot of times, from the employee's perspective, not knowing what's going on is just as bad as not doing anything. So if you have regular meetings with your staff, letting them know of the things that you're implementing, like many of the things that we discussed in this webinar, I think that'll go a long way to really showing that their employer is being proactive and maybe even taking suggestions, talking to them about what are the things that will make them feel safe in the workplace. And again, the more comfortable they feel with you, with their employer, and being able to share these ideas, these concerns, we believe the more likely you're going to have a cooperative workforce that's not going to be afraid to come back to work and to kind of get back to that quote unquote new normal, because you are being proactive and you are communicating with them effectively. All right. I think that's all the time we have. Again, we obviously didn't get to answer all your questions. For those of you in attendance that have provided contact information, we will be sending over to you a copy of our presentation, as well as our contact information in case you want to submit any follow-up questions to us, and we'll do our best to answer those questions as quickly as possible for you. We appreciate the opportunity to share this with you. We hope that you have found it informative. And again, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to be of assistance to the partnership.
Thank you, Jose.